Time to get this old Laney ready for the new ground scheme. So I'm going to start with some things that just look really, really abrupt. And then we'll fine tune as we go. So this old bus wire, which only makes contact with chassis through the presence pot, is going away, and you'll see what's replacing it. And I've got a nice plan for that. But next I've got to go through here and disconnect some of these things going to ground, like this cap, and just get it all ready and do a little more surgical disconnections at pots that are getting replaced and such. So this is the before. I'll show you the during and the after. This is the old presence pot, and just like the others, it's really cheap pot metal that really cannot be tightened to. And there were no toothed washers holding them in place. If you're going to use a pot casing for ground for the entire amp, you really need to have good metal-to-metal contact that cannot come loose. And they had crappy metal-to-metal contact. All the pots were loose. And it's really hard to tighten them up against an acrylic front panel without cracking the panel if you get enough tension. So just a fail all around. I'm going to clean the metal on the chassis where each new pot's going to go. And each new pot's going to have tooth washers, just so that they stay nice and tight without cracking the acrylic front panel. But none of the grounds in the amp will be made through those. And I'll be able to reuse all the existing wires. These purple blue ones are the grounds and the connections to pots and stuff. Anyway, next thing to do is to get all that gunk off the back of the panel here. This is just a small taste of the nastiness that was between the pot cases and the chassis. So this amp had no good grounds before. Got them all nice and clean now. But like I said, that's not how we're going to have ground. But I'll put a little bit of hole in the chassis right about here, and we'll revisit that. Okay, new bus wire installed here. And this is 2 strands of 20 gauge braided together and soldered along the entire length. So the entire thing is tendon soldered, there's no gaps. And all new pots of correct tapers. My ears were correct. They had a audio taper pot in the treble on the amp before, which made the taper just terrible. And the noise floor was quite high. With the new bus wire, with everything going to ground here at the input rather than at the phase inverter, it is much quieter, as I anticipated. I also did 25K instead of the 5K on the presence, so I've got a resistor and cap, not just a cap. Fairly standard stuff. The big bright cap is gone. The dark cap is gone. I've got some very small value picofarad caps just to give a little bit of brightness, make those switches more usable. I did not have new ones with long leads, so I've got these tipped in with a wire connection. If the owner likes these, as I expect he will, I'll get the right ones. But here's what it's sounding like on channel 1. Oh, it helps if I plug in. Turn the bright switch on. And again, it may not be something that he ever needs to do, but it's there. Got the tone stacked pretty much at noon right now. I don't have the knobs on, so it's approximately at noon. Very nice sound now. Since the previous video, I have changed out the rectification diodes, and the amp that was really compressed and weird sounding before is very loud now. Much greater volume. Sounds very nice to my ears. I changed out the standby switch as well. It had a non-original switch, and its bat was much longer than the stock switches. I changed it for the carling like you find in a Fender, and its bat is just slightly shorter than the originals, but it is a closer match, and the switch that was in there was just pretty crappy. So that's channel 1, which was already the better sounding of the two. Channel 2 is going to be a little bit darker, just because of the nature of the mix resistor and the bright cap across that. The bright cap on that. It just makes that channel a little bit brighter, much more balanced sounding, less dark, and it should not affect the sound of the first channel. No change if I switch the bright cap on channel 2. Channel 1 is unaffected. If this were my amp, I would expect I would leave the bright switch off most of the time on channel 1. Unless I had a really dark sounding humbucker in the neck. And then on channel 2, I would probably keep the bright switch on most of the time, unless I was going for a jazz thing, because it's just a very nice sounding channel. And high gain demos and real crunch stuff will happen tomorrow. It is a non-master volume 50 watt amp, probably closer to 45 watts, but you know, what's a few watts among friends? You can't hear the difference. Anyway, it's loud, and tomorrow I'll find out how loud it is. I mean, the scope will tell me to an extent, but the playing is the real test, and where breakup happens, and is the transition to breakup good? The presence control is kind of subtle. It's there, but it's not doing a ton. Which is usually a sign that there's not a ton of negative feedback. So I may play around with the value of the negative feedback resistor, which is right here. Sometimes, or it could be where it's connected, to which tap it's connected as well. But I know the owner is going to want this to have relatively late breakup. So I imagine next time you really hear this, or at least, well, maybe next time after that, I'm going to get that presence and negative feedback so the amp transitions into breakup exactly the way I want it to, at which point that presence control will probably do a lot more. Tone stack is much more responsive than it was before. A lot of really cheap pots, a lot of funky tapers. Those diodes were probably the root cause of most of the ills this amp had last time you heard it or saw it. And one oddity, and I don't know if it's factory or someone previously did this, the red and yellow wires going to the grids, the output tubes, were reversed so that this tube was on this side and this tube was on this side. That made no sense to me. So I flipped these back so that this is the first This goes to the first output tube, which is just kind of a Marshall Fender standard, which meant that I had to reverse the plate connections on the output tube socket, so we didn't get positive feedback, which is not a pretty thing. I don't know if it was factory or not. I don't think it was. I think it was a prior repair that had been done badly, and then they flipped the wiring at the output tube sockets. So anyway, I got to stop because it's time to go to dinner. But this amp is, I mean, this is really sounding nice now. And imagine the guitar was actually in tune.